The Chaser Report is recorded on Gadigal land.
Striving for mediocrity in a world of excellence. This is the Chaser Report.
Hello and welcome to the Chaser Report with Dom and Charles.
Charles, foreigners are scary.
Yes,
they're terrifying.
they are. Yes.
And the people who are most scared of foreigners at the moment, Charles, it's not, little old ladies living in fear. It's not the kids worried that the High Court let all these criminals walk on the streets. People who seem to be scaredest of foreigners at the moment, Charles, specifically asylum seekers, are the Labor Party. They're very scared that if they don't fix this issue, they're going to lose the next election. Peter Dutton's going to make political hay out of it in a sort of Tony Abbott-style scare campaign. And so they are, in response to the scare campaign, apparently genuinely scared, Charles.
Wow, okay. Gosh. And should we be scared as well? Is that how this works?
I think... Look, I'll talk you through what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because it's unclear to me. We should definitely be scared. I'm just not clear whether we should be scared of Labor or scared of the other parties that have just blocked Labor in the Senate. Because Labor took their whole new plan to the Senate earlier today, I think, presumably thinking that it would be a lay-down misère because no one ever votes against being tough on asylum seekers in Australian politics. That never happens. And everyone voted against it.
Everyone. What? So, Pauline Hanson voted against
the coalition voted against it. The Greens...
Yeah.
The other crossbenchers, presumably Pocock, including Pauline Hanson and Ralph Babbitt from the UAP.
So what
you're
saying
all blocked it.
Is Pauline Hanson is soft on refugees?
Apparently. She wants a Senate inquiry. Now, to be fair to Pauline, the Senate inquiry might be on whether or not it can be toughened up. I'm not sure. It's not clear. But they're saying, look, you're trying to rush it through too quickly. Right. But Labor's trying to get this done before Easter. And Claire O'Neill, in response to this, said, Peter Dutton and the Liberals could be voting to protect Australians today. They could be taking a big step in keeping the community safe, but instead they've chosen not to.
Okay, so I feel like we should take an ad break and we should just take a step back because I have no idea what's going on here.
Charles, okay, we'll take an ad break, but just look behind you in case there's either an asylum seeker, a criminal who's been let out by the High Court, or possibly a member of the Albanese government cowering behind your sofa in case they lose the election on this issue.
Okay, so can we just, before you get into it, Dom, and I know you're going to go through and you're going to explain...
I'm going to go through it in excruciating detail.
And you're going to explain the laws that Labor has failed to pass, basically... As far as I can tell, making refugees illegal, right?
Some of them. It does. Some of the provisions in the law are quite extraordinary, actually. We'll get to that. But why don't we just set the scene?
But just step back, which is my understanding of a good scare campaign, which is what all refugee campaigns boil down to, right? Like, yes, it's wrong to persecute people fleeing for their lives. Strictly speaking... If Australia were back in, 2,000 years ago, in some ways, Jesus wouldn't have been allowed into this country, would he?
Yeah, and to be fair, the boat people who turned up in 1788 turned out to be quite a problem.
And there's a long history of terrible people arriving on boats in Australia.
I mean, if First Nations could have decided who came into the country in the circumstances in which they'd come, they would have said no. There wouldn't have been lots and lots of viruses and other massacres, and they would have had a much better time, I think.
Problem solved. But what I would say is the first rule of running an effective scare campaign is to have a fucking story that anyone can follow about why you're running a scare campaign, right?
Okay.
And what I don't quite understand is, they had all that sort of problem with the High Court, but no one has told, under Howard, it was clear, wasn't it? It was like there was a boat.
There was the Tampa.
There's the Tampa. They look a bit different. 9/11's just happened.
And they were so terrible that they threw children overboard, except that they didn't.
Yes, exactly. They had a whole... It was all fiction, but it was a complete narrative with photos and props and
brown people
cropping Photoshop jobs. All
and in the ocean.
Yeah, all the theatre that you need to run a scare campaign. Labor have just not done any of the groundwork and just gone straight to the let's pass a draconian law, but not tell the story about this scare campaign. They've missed out the most important part,
So you're
which
saying
is to,
they've been
first of all,
trying.
make us scared.
They've been trying to pull a Howard, but they've fucked it up.
They've
Is there
fucked up.
anything sadder than trying to mount a scare campaign and failing to scare anybody?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but Charles, let's just remember what's happened here, because they've sort of been reverse wedged a bit here. What happened was all these people were locked up indefinitely, many of whom had been convicted of things overseas, and genuinely, as we discussed before on the podcast, some
Hilarious.
pretty heinous crimes, right?
Yeah, there was an assassin. One of them was an assassin.
Yes, there was
a
sexual assault.
assassin. Yeah.
Various other things. So, people who I think even the most passionate refugee advocates would possibly think twice before simply letting into the community. But then the High Court ruled that indefinite detention of high-risk offenders is not constitutional, right? They said that you can't keep people locked up forever, which I guess is a fairly foundational principle in our legal system if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, some would say it's a bit of a, finicky, lawyery approach to
it's sort of habeas
freedom.
corpus and all that. You can't just keep people locked up forever.
I mean,
it's
one of those
killjoys. It's what lawyers do.
It's one of those principles that have been around 1,000 years, and so therefore it's getting a bit old. It's a bit old,
and it certainly doesn't apply in Guantanamo Bay, right? So we've kind of it's out of date, really.
Yeah,
but so the High Court's done this
out of fashion,
and then unsurprisingly, Peter Dutton, despite the fact that this all happened when the coalition was in office, the whole court case started back then. The coalition's been making absolute hay and saying that Albanese, the government's got to act to keep Australians safe from these terrible people, allegedly. They've got to do something. And so they put in the monitoring regime. They tried to bring in anklets and all this kind of stuff. And then the coalition for weeks, do something. In the Dunkley by-election, you might remember Susan Lee, we talked about on the podcast, was essentially trying to say, what's Labor's policy on criminals next door to you? All that sort of stuff went down. So then
but didn't
the
they
government
lose? They lost that.
Yes, it didn't actually prove very effective. Hilariously enough, because people weren't actually scared. But then it's as though the government feels that that's a really compelling attack line, even though it failed in Dunkley. And so they're trying to do whatever they can to make sure that these people can actually be deported, can actually be sent home. And that's why they've brought in these amendments, which are incredibly draconian.
So let's go through them. Yeah.
So this is pretty amazing stuff particularly from a Labor government, but even it goes further than kind of Philip Ruddock reforms in some ways. So this is the Migration Amendment (brackets removal and other measures) bill, right? So it applies to people who they say are not refugees. They've exhausted all legal avenues to stay in Australia, but they refuse to leave. So the first thing that it does is that it empowers the immigration minister to direct a person that the government wants to deport to cooperate with all the efforts to remove them. So if the government wants to deport you, it's now, well, if it goes ahead, it would be law that you have to comply. And if you don't comply, they can lock you up for up to 5 years. So you can't object.
Yes. Right.
Which is,
So you
I've never
can't
heard of a
you
law
can't-
like this before.
You can't launch an appeal because that would be against the law.
Yeah.
And
So
the actual act of appealing would be 5 years in jail.
So it's like a bouncer, as I understand it, at a
Yes.
party. He goes, come on, mate, you've had too much. And if you try and protest, they punch you.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like that is seems to be the principle that's being brought in.
It's sort of a little bit like my parenting style. Though.
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah. Where you go, do you want to go to bed now or do you want to go to bed in 5 minutes? Right. And either way, you then go, well, you're going to go to jail for 5 years.
I've heard you say that. It's quite harsh.
Yeah.
And on that note, Charles, I think you should let your youngest out. I think it's probably been about 5 years since you locked him up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I wonder.
I don't know whether you fed him during that period.
I think I might have.
Do you want to just take a
forgotten
moment to go and
feed
check?
him.
Yeah.
Haven't fed him.
Okay,
since
so
last
I'm getting
year.
this summary from the Herald, by the way. I'm just basically reading out how they've summarised this. This is another, I've never heard this in law before, Charles. Holding a genuine fear of harm or persecution if you're returned to your country of origin is not a reasonable excuse for refusing to cooperate. So at the same time as the government is saying that Assange has got to be let out because if he goes to the US, he'll get in terrible trouble, they're also saying it's not allowed to be scared of harm or persecution. You can't even have a genuine fear and refuse to cooperate. You've just got to go. You've got to go to your death, basically, if that's what you think's going to happen.
Yeah, and in actual fact, so what it's saying is even if you have a genuine fear, just toughen up, love.
Toughen up.
Yeah, right. So, and I presume that
it's helping, actually. It's like the government's in an episode of Fear Factor. They're helping these people confront their fears, or else.
Or else, yeah. And what's the penalty for having a genuine fear? Like
probably death when you get off the plane, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's
the usual
right,
one. Okay.
I mean, I think, look, not wanting to be glib about this, I think this is going to also affect a lot of Americans because,
oh yes,
like if I was an American staying here, I'd have a genuine fear of returning home, even if I was just on holiday or something. That's gonna capture a lot more people than they realise. New Zealand?
Oh, what about all the Kiwis who are going to go home and be teased? Yeah.
Yes.
Barnaby Joyce, when he goes back to New Zealand, he's going to be mocked.
Yep. That's a genuine fear.
Here is the bit that's the most extraordinary part in terms of being draconian. And again, I've never heard of any ideas like this before. Donald Trump might well pick up on this regime, Charles. The government can also ban, the Herald says, people from applying for a visa to Australia if they're a citizen of a country that does not accept the voluntary return of its citizens. This includes countries such as Iran, Iraq, and South Sudan. So those people, let's say that if they get sent back, you can't apply to come to Australia if your country doesn't accept the voluntary return of people, and presumably people being dumped like this as well. So we're not going to get anyone in from Iran, Iraq, or South Sudan.
So wait a minute. So that means like no one can ever come from those countries to Australia?
Presumably,
right?
Unless they change their laws to allow the voluntary return of their citizens.
But isn't the whole point about, if you're
Refugees.
fleeing for your life, that you go to another country, a safe haven, and then you apply? You go as a tourist or whatever. You find any excuse to leave the country
To not be
you're
killed.
not going to, because you're not going to sort of walk out the door going, "Oh, I'm fleeing for my life." You're going, "Oh, I'm just going on a family holiday, or I'm just going on a research trip or whatever," and then you
apply.
So essentially, it's perfect, isn't it? Because it sort of captures the countries that are most likely to be persecuting their people and have a whole lot of asylum seekers, and saying, "Well, you get to keep all the people you're persecuting." It's kind of genius in a way, isn't it?
It is.
I mean,
it is pretty good.
I mean, it's sort of evil genius. Like, don't get me wrong. It's like, but it's. I mean, who came up with this legislation? Like, who
designed
drafted
this?
these laws? Who came
I
up
don't
with
know.
this?
I mean,
Or
the
is
thing
this Albo? This is all Albo. This is get Albo's fingers all over
I
it.
honestly don't know who it is.
He's gone. There's two Albos. There's public housing Albo that his public face, and then there's evil Albo. There's dark Albo.
Dark Albo, like dark
Albo.
Dark Biden.
Dark
or dark
Albo.
Brandon.
Yeah, that's what's happened. He's shifted.
So we're in the situation now where the opposition is saying the government doesn't want scrutiny over this bill. They're not looking at what it does. And here's the killer. Here's the killer line from the coalition, from James Patterson, the Home Affairs spokesperson for the opposition. He says, what is the link between this bill and that ASF 17 case, people that they want to deport? So they're saying, does this even kick out the people we want to kick out?
So wait a minute. The law doesn't even do the thing that the government is claiming it does.
Well, that's what the coalition is saying, is can we just check? If we're going to pass all these powers, let's just check that we pick on the right people.
Yeah, but it's all topsy-turvy.
Well, the thing is that Labor are not very good at this stuff, right? And so what's happened is Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister, she's made Stephanie Foster, the Home Affairs Secretary, cry, apparently, after she, you might have heard, the Secretary released details of the ex-immigration detainees' criminal records. Exactly the thing the government wanted to suppress is exactly what these people are being convicted of, which, I can see the argument for making that information public.
And so the point is they're wanting to be tough on crime, but they don't really know how to do it properly.
They're being tough on public servants.
Tough on public service. They want to be seen as, so they're cosplaying. They're cosplaying the Liberal Party.
And badly.
Yes. And because they've got absolutely no moral centre, they've gone completely off the deep end and are doing things that even people with no shred of human decency go, like Pauline Hanson and the UAP and all those sorts of people. Even they're going, well, hang on.
Hang on, guys. Let's just check.
Let's just check. Let's just check ourselves when we're beating up refugees.
You know that moment in parenting where you get your buttons pushed too far and you absolutely snap and just go way too far, and then you immediately have to go, hang on, no, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean I would throw your iPad in the bin. I'm not actually going to. You have to walk it back. I wonder if Labor's going to do that.
The Chaser Report. News you know you can't trust.
There's one more detail I haven't told you, Charles.
Okay.
And this is, again, I'm just reading this out. I'm not an immigration lawyer. I don't understand the fine detail. But just give me your honest reaction to this, Charles.
Okay.
The legislation, this is the final bullet point, it also allows the government to reconsider whether Australia owes protection to someone who's fled a perilous country if the government is trying to deport them. So if the government wants to deport a person who's fled a perilous country, it allows them to reconsider whether they can deport them. It doesn't sound great for the person who's
I don't understand.
fled the perilous country.
So, but I don't understand what extra power can't the government already reconsider whether to deport them or not?
It sounds like they can reconsider their reconsideration, Charles. I don't really know what's going on. It just sounds as though
you can have multiple trials, so you can be stuck in this infinite loop of the judge says no. You can't deport that person, and the government's then allowed to go, oh well, we're now reconsidering it.
We've reconsidered it. Whoops.
Yeah. And then they can't appeal because then that breaks the second rule, which is they're objecting to their own deportation. Baha, that's it.
Well,
It's very coherent.
It is the most vicious of circles, isn't it?
Yes.
So what happens if the next draft of the law says that we're not allowed to make fun of the government's attempts to deport all these people, and if we get 5 years?
I think that's
jail.
what's missing. I think that's what's missing from this legislation, Don. I think
that's true. If it had in the bill that any parliamentarians who dared to ask questions would be considered in breach of the immigration minister's efforts to deport
5 years
the
in
person,
jail,
that would do the trick.
They could have locked up all the senators who voted against it. That is what they should do.
Yep. I think that's the way through the deadlock.
Yep. So I'm glad we've solved Australia's immigration and indeed democracy problem. I've often felt that the problem with the Labor Party is not that it doesn't know how to tell a story. It's not that it doesn't know how to run a scare campaign.
They just need to learn how to be more convincing at being harsh.
Yes.
They just got to practice. Like all of us as parents, sometimes you've really got to punish asylum seekers who are in desperate need and think they're going to be killed if they go back home. Apparently that's what we have to do to win an election now.
Yeah. But wait a minute, did all the left-wing Labor MPs vote for this bill, Don?
They have to, don't they? It's caucus discipline.
I know, but...
You can't cross the floor.
Yeah, but they had that same excuse in Nuremberg. It doesn't actually apply when something is evil.
But Charles,
you're not
Penny
bound
Wong had
to
sit
evil.
there and Penny Wong had to sit there and say why she wasn't voting for gay marriage time and time again on Q&A. She had to vote against it. I mean, this is what it takes to be part of the Labor Party, Charles. It's a shit sandwich. You've got to eat every bite of.
I've worked it out. I know why they're doing it.
Why?
I've worked it out. Albo doesn't want the job anymore. He doesn't want to be Prime Minister. He wants to be voted out of the next election. What does he do? He comes up with a piece of legislation that is so against everything that Labor stands for that all the Labor voters will abandon Labor. He comes up with something that's so objectionable, even the Liberal Party and the One Nation Party will vote against Labor. Like, literally no one's going to vote for Labor at the next election. And
you're forgetting one
then
thing, Charles.
He gets to go and count his, parliamentary
Well, he's getting
pension.
married. He can have a long
He's getting
honeymoon.
married. Yeah.
But
Better not
Charles-
go to a place that doesn't have good deportation laws.
That's true, actually. You'll never get back.
Reciprocal yeah.
But Charles, the thing is, this hasn't been put to the opinion polls yet. Nobody ever lost an opinion poll in this country by being too
on
harsh
refugees.
on refugees.
Yes.
Albanese might have just won the next election.
You're right.
Dutton's toast, I'm thinking.
That's toast.
You can't
Yep.
come back from this.
No, you can't come back from that. Jeez.
Happy
God.
Easter, Charles.
4D
We've tied ourselves
chess.
up in knots late at night
Yeah.
trying to make sense of this policy. It is a very strange... I've never heard of a law that goes this far, really, in all the years of politicising this debate. This goes further than ever before.
Yep. It feels like we've got to roll out the race card again.
Oh, you mean Craig's outfit?
Yeah, I want Craig's outfit.
It's sad, though, Charles, because I really wanted to go to South Sudan, and now I just don't know if I'm going to get a visa.
You know what's going to happen, though? Other countries are going to not allow people to come from Australia because our laws are so draconian that we'll be classed in the same level as Iran and South Sudan.
We'll be an international pariah at last.
Yeah. Our gear is from road. We're part of the Iconoclast network.
So,